Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you again for having me. I have enjoyed the morning sessions and this afternoon sessions. It left me with so much to think about as well. So thank you to the organizers and to everyone. I'm going to share my PPT, but it only has like a few images just to give you an idea of the places that I'll be talking about. So to start, the title of my presentation is Baraka and Muslim-Christian Encounters at Sacred Water Springs in Palestine. I think everyone in the room is aware of how of the importance of water and how it is revered in both Muslim and Christian traditions, which includes many stories from the biblical creation story to the Quranic passages that mention God's creation or God's creating all living things out of water, to also the narratives about the lives of the prophets and their companions that have lived from generation to generation among Muslims and Christians. In historic Palestine, water is seen as the container of life, purity, and blessing, and it's also a connector between people and between their lands. Water springs, for example, were the places where people, mostly women, but also children, men, and couples met and socialized. At the spring, people exchanged news, women embroidered dresses, men gave their animals water, and of course, they collected water in jars and carried it home to be used for drinking, cooking, and cleaning. Today, water is mostly supplied to people's houses through pipelines, and they do not have to physically collect it from the spring, although many springs are still visited by people. Nonetheless, water resources continue to be sites of political, economic, legal, and ethical contestation between Palestinians and the Israeli occupation, especially within the ongoing Israeli control over Palestinian water supply. The focus of this presentation is water springs, as the title entails, specifically sacred springs, those which are considered as sites of religious and spiritual significance for both Christians and Muslims. I examine here the examples of two water springs, Ain al-Adra, or the Spring of Virgin Mary in Nazareth, and Silwan Water Spring in Jerusalem, which are significant for Palestinians, both Christians and Muslims, not only as spaces from which they collected water, which was a common practice in the past, but also as sacred sites in both religions. I am interested in investigating the shared stories about these water sites, common practices that took place at them, and the contextual religious representations of barakah or blessing connected to them. For the purpose of this presentation, I performed life story interviews with 5 Palestinian women aged 65 to 93. The criteria for selection depended very much on the experience of those women in collecting water from the 2 springs that I look at here and their life experiences around water. 4 of the women were Muslim and 1 was Christian due to access issues. As a Palestinian from the West Bank, my mobility is very much governed by the Israeli restrictions, as both sites are located within areas occupied in 1948 and 1967. I was able to find younger women who heard stories about the 2 springs from their mothers or grandmothers, which I will also link to here. And I also will refer to secondary resources, mostly travelogues and other writers who mentioned the 2 sites in their travels, although these were not many. So I'll first introduce you briefly to the 2 sites and their significance for both Muslims and Christians. I'll start with the Ain al-Adra, the Spring of Virgin Mary, also known as Mary's Well or Virgin's Fountain, which was the major water supply for the town of Nazareth for probably a millennia. In his book, Travels in Egypt and the Holy Land, William Ray Wilson recognized it as the Well of the Virgin, which provides the inhabitants of Nazareth with water. It is believed by the locals that Virgin Mary used to get water from this spring, and that it was the site where Angel Gabriel, or Jibril in Arabic, told her that she would conceive a baby son while she was filling her water pot at the fountain. As a result of its association with Virgin Mary and Jesus Christ, the fountain became extremely valuable for Christians. Although different in natures, Muslims too recognize the importance of this water well and the symbolic importance religiously of Nazareth as a location where Jesus and his mother, Virgin Mary, lived a portion of their lives. In the writings of travelers in the 17th and 18th centuries, the spring was described as a holy spring, the water of which had healing powers to the extent that Franciscan priests only drank from the spring and gave its water to the sick. The second water spring is, excuse me, that's another picture. In Jerusalem, especially in Silwan, a Palestinian neighborhood in East Jerusalem, there is another spring also associated with Virgin Mary and Jesus Christ. It is also part of it is called Maryam Spring, or the spring of the Virgin, which feeds into the pool of Silwan, the only and the most ancient permanent water resource in Jerusalem. The site is holy for Jews, Christians, and Muslims, as is the city of Jerusalem. The spring is mentioned in the Hebrew Bible and in the New Testament. In the latter, the location is recognized as the site where Jesus healed the man blind from birth. For local Christians, the spring is also identified as the site where Mary washed baby Jesus's undergarments, which gave it the name Ayn Sitna Maryam, or the spring of Mother Mary. In medieval Muslim tradition, the spring of Silwan was among the most sacred water sources in the world. According to a tradition documented by theologian Ahmad ibn Hanbal, any pilgrim who visited Jerusalem should swim in Ain Silwan, the pool of Silwan, since it is one of the springs of the gardens of Eden. Muslims believe that the waters of the spring are holy, like the Zamzam water in Mecca, which was mentioned in the morning session. Some even say that it originates from Zamzam, and in a legend, the waters of Silwan visit Zamzam in Mecca on the night of the Hajj, or the highlight of the Hajj, which is the day of Arafah, when the Muslim pilgrimage takes place. In the olden times, pilgrims returning from the Hajj used to go to the spring and perform another purifying ritual. The importance of the spring increased as it was designated as an Islamic endowment at the time of the third caliph, Uthman ibn Affan, where it was endowed for the poor of Jerusalem and to water its orchids. Today, Palestinian and non-Jewish residents of Silwan have limited access to the spring freely due to the restrictions imposed by the Israeli occupation. Nonetheless, the residents of Silwan continue to speak about centuries-old traditions of using and bathing in the spring before weddings, during family events, on weekdays or weekends, or on holidays. So the two springs or pools of water have strange and miraculous properties attributed to them, including claims of baraka, or divine blessing. Baraka is blessing or divine power from God, which is believed to be found within physical objects, places, people. Barakas associate some individuals like prophets, sacred places like shrines or tombs and mosques of saints, or the environmental world, including earth, rocks, trees, and water, obviously. Although one might argue that all water possesses some kind of baraka, since it has central role in purification necessary for ritual performance and for nourishing the human body, the waters of some springs, like those of Ain Silwan and Ain Al-Adra, enjoy bestowed physical and spiritual purity, around which people have developed popular accounts. Particularly, those accounts are related to bodily experiences and sensational forms. The sensory connection could be felt when drinking the water, which flows into the human body, or through physical contact with it, through washing the hands, face, and other parts of the body, especially those sick parts, as considered by research participants. Both Muslims and Christians shared stories of receiving cures by bathing in or drinking the waters from these sources. Research participants spoke about believing in the power of the water to heal skin diseases, wounds, stomachache, and rheumatism, among others. The healing power in the stories also included women fertility, as women were advised to wash in the water of the spring and drink it for a safe pregnancy. In a way, the water of the springs was considered a therapeutic landscape, or a place that had reputation of providing physical, mental, and spiritual healing. The overlap of Christian and Muslim experiences at water springs implied that the two groups share common religious beliefs and share local unifying social traditions. It shows that the divine blessing, the Baraka, is tangibly accessible through water in specific sacred spaces that are associated with holy persons like Jesus and Mary, or holy places like Nazareth and Jerusalem. In a way, one could argue that water symbolizes or symbolized by the rituals taking place at springs unified Muslims and Christians and assert a shared Palestinian cultural identity in position or in opposition to a divided religious identification. The boundaries that might separate Christians and Muslims in their everyday lives, for example, in churches and mosques, are transcended at the water spring where the two people continued to exist. They utilize the water to heal or seek protections from evil and harm while keeping their Christian and Muslim identities. Incorporating the shared narratives on water are also essential as markers of a shared Palestinian identity in the face of the ongoing attempts to colonize Palestinian landscape by the Israeli occupation, including those related to controlling water resources, access to water, and other colonization attempts. To conclude, the stories and interpretations recounted by visitors to the well of the Virgin Mary and to the spring of Silwan adapt religious narratives from Islamic and Christian traditions and talk about the significance of water traditions performed at the two sites. At these water sites, religious boundaries are blurred by the pursuit of the Baraka by Christians and Muslims alike. And I'll stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Again, in a moment, we'll take one or two questions. I was going to say, if you want to continue conversation with any of our participants who are online, I can't remember if you could always contact our office and we could ask if we can pass on their email address if you had particular, not just perhaps a question from the paper, but you want to carry on some kind of connection. So please feel free to do that. One or two questions now. I'm not that, Richard, you tell me if there's a hand raised on the on there. Thank you. Any question on that? Yes.
Thank you very much for that very interesting paper. You had mentioned that these locations have been under occupation since 1948 and 1967. And I assume that that means that these ritual visits have been interrupted since that time. Has there been any pressure to be able to resume that for religious purposes, or because it's coming from women, nobody pays attention?
Thank you. This is an interesting question. As I mentioned before, some of, especially Ain al-Adra, the spring of Virgin Mary in Nazareth, stopped working for water collection in the same way in the 1960s, I think. I think it was 67, if I'm not mistaken, simply because of water piping as well. So the church constructed also like some structures around it. So it's still visited, but not to collect water as such. It's different in the Pool of Silwan, which still exists, and there are Israeli organizations that are controlling access to it. There has been two cases in the Israeli higher court actually to get Palestinians and non-Jewish people access to the water springs because obviously the place has also some Jewish importance, and that made these organizations claim that this heritage site should not be accessible for everybody. In 2 years ago, I believe there has been like a success in one of the cases where now non-Jewish visitors can get access again to the place, but it's still very much a site of contestation because as I mentioned before, it is like originally or before the occupation, it used to be an endowment site. So it's a site like endowment in the Muslim tradition is any site that is not it is not allowed to be sold, and it should be like for the public good. And because of these contestations, the site itself becomes a site of political mobilization as well for the Palestinians who claim it, not only for religious reasons, but also for political ones, as is their stay and their claims in Jerusalem.
Thank you. I think we are going to move on to our next speaker now. Thanks very much, Kholoud.
Thank you for having me.
And